Somebody like to move? Moved by Alan, seconded by Jeremy. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Do we have any declarations of interest this morning? Not aware of any. So we'll move to item 4, which is public forum petitions and deputations, and I'll welcome Laurie, Bryce, Logan and Duncan to come forward, and we've got five minutes to present, and then I'll take under 5 minutes for questions or clarification. So welcome. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. We come here as representing rural community and farming families who are concerned about the impact of freshwater national policy regulations will have on the mental wellbeing and economy of Southland. We understand that you as a council have had these regulations forced on you as much as we have had them forced on ourselves. This, however, does not take away the responsibility from yourselves, as you will be charged by government with implementing these ridiculous rules. If I may point out a few obvious flaws in the regulations as pertaining to southern New Zealand. Number 1 is the sowing dates for pastures and crops. We believe this is totally unworkable, as it is linked to a calendar day date, 1st of November till 2024, and then 1st of October from then on. Rural communities have at all times endeavoured to have their crops and pastures sown as soon as practical, because it is in their best interest to have the ground producing rather than sitting barren. Ground temperatures and moisture levels have always dictated sowing dates and always will. This also brings into consideration health and safety issues, especially with contractors. 2 is winter grazing. This is mostly to do with hoof prints. There must be no pugging equal hoof prints deeper than 5 centimetres over 50% of the paddock, and no single instance of pugging deeper than 20 centimetres. Anywhere in a paddock except around gateways or permanent fixtures. One extreme overnight weather event and chances are cattle farmers will be in breach of these regulations. Also, the 10-degree slope factor has a number of questions around it. Is there science to say this is where it should be? Having both flat and rolling country for myself, I don't winter on the flats as they are flood prone, and I don't want to lose my topsoil down the river. 3 is mental health and well-being. We as a group have great concern for the health of the rural people of Southland. Families are feeling the strain already, not just from weather, but more so from the impending regulations that will do nothing to enhance water quality, but will in fact impact severely on their ability to be financially viable. Where to from here?
Okay, so following the tractor trek of 2 to Gore, that became the tractor trek of 120 tractors, and indeed would have been more, but for the fact it was one of the few fine days that week. We've received a lot of communication from farmers and other urban supporters in the region. The overwhelming, in fact 100% views that we have received are that the sowing date, pugging and slope cultivation rules are simply unworkable and show no appreciation of farming in Southland, an area that punches well above its weight in output, jobs and earnings for the good of the local and the New Zealand economy. Farmers are quite unequivocal. They are simply not going to comply with these daft rules, and as the weather this spring has shown, particularly around sowing dates, they are totally unrealistic. Appreciating that central government have thrust the burden of policing these rules onto the regional councils like yourselves, we would like to know what Environment South is intending to do about non-compliance by its ratepayers who are its major funders. Will you prosecute them or turn a blind eye? Because your rural ratepayers will undoubtedly be thinking, having done their very best with the environment by altering many practices in consultation with Environment South and field staff for the best, while still having to run a viable business, then being nixed by the weather, then facing prosecution by your organisation is a bridge too far, and they may then be forced to take steps of their own. Perhaps a good example of what farmers face continually is reflected in the recent election, where the best laid and long signalled election date read sowing dates, pegging, etc., were suddenly compromised by the coronavirus pandemic, read spring storms, and logic required that the date be moved, read common sense. But funnily enough, this was all achieved without threats of prosecution, and we only had an election every 3 years while farmers face the weather every day. Therefore, what we would like to know is Environment Southland, through the local bodies association or whatever, going to stand up to the government over these unworkable rules, or their constituents, i.e. the ratepayers, who are going to be severely affected in their businesses by this, particularly, as Bryce has pointed out, young farming families. Will you then say that you are not going to prosecute under this regime, or are the rural ratepayers going to have to stand up to Environment Southland over this issue that clearly affects their property rights? We appreciate you guys are the meat and the sandwich here, but would like some absolute clarity on your position, please.
Now, as you realise, we can't get into a debate, but just as a matter of clarification, you're possibly aware that our council has taken a proactive stance. There is a working group that will inform our response to government. We've had a very positive response from the two ministers when they were down and have asked us basically to give them information. That will happen, but I'll now open up for questions of clarification. So, Robert, have you got a question?
Bryce, could I ask you, you mentioned pugging, and you're finding the proposals unpalatable. Because pugging's an issue, obviously, with soil health. What is your alternative suggestion? How would you manage that issue which has been highlighted?
Possibly the 5 centimetres is just not going to work simply because of the rain event, and every animal is going to go in 5 centimetres or greater. So I think it has to be perhaps worked out better. I don't know what the science is behind it, but it doesn't seem very usable to me. I think it just needs to be worked out better as a depth, and perhaps to do with rainfall or something, so that there's an indication when farmers need to take their stock off paddocks or something like that. It's just, it's not workable the way it is.
I've got Peter, then Eric.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bryce. So just picking up on one of your comments there, you mentioned that the freshwater rules are going to have no effect whatsoever. Is that effect? Did I get that right in the statement?
No, definitely exactly the other way around.
Yeah, but no effect on the environment.
Oh, sorry, no improvement on the environment. Yes, exactly.
Could you elaborate on that? Why do you believe that?
Possibly because I think there's other things that will have more of an effect on the environment. I'm part of a water care group myself, and we've done a lot of trialling to see what does work and what doesn't. And we're finding that sediment traps and critical source area planting is having a far greater effect on purifying water and taking sediment out of it than anything else. So we can't see how sowing dates are going to actually, and perhaps pugging is one that we have to be very careful with, but that can be mitigated through sediment traps.
Eric.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. Acknowledging that you said we're the meat and the sandwich, I'm interested to know what lines of communication you've had and may still be planning on having with the Minister for the Environment and his officials with regard to the proposals.
There we go.
But we're certainly, writing letters and emails, etc., through to the Minister of the Environment. Also, we're tomorrow going to see Liz Craig, who's the Labor list person down here, who also sits on the Environment Select Committee, even though these rules never actually went to the Select Committee, but we thought it might be a good idea. So we're going to put give it a bit of pressure on that we can, and we're an apolitical group, so we're not any organisation. So we just like to think that that'll help the cause, if you like. And one of the other things I think is that Bryce mentioned water care groups, and the whole consenting thing to me is a total waste of everybody's money, and it's setting up a great bureaucracy, and it's just taking money out of farmers' pockets they could be spending on improving things. And I think any money should be going into those water care groups, because any organisation I've had anything to do with, people become part of the thing, and initially they rail against it, but peer pressure and seeing things happen is what changes things, not hitting everyone over the head with a blunt object, which is where we seem to be at the moment.
Have you considered sending a petition to Parliament which would bring the matter to the attention of the whole House and require the Select Committee to make a determination?
Would you consider that? We haven't acted on it yet, but we probably will.
You probably will.
I'll say, yes, we will. Okay. Thanks, Eric.
We had actually considered doing it and delivering it to Parliament by tractors, but we realised there was nobody going to be at Parliament, and we were working along those lines, so that's why we haven't actually enacted anything yet.
Table offices open continuously.
Any further questions of clarification? I've got Alan, then Jeremy.
So when it comes to hitting these sort of dates, I know 1st of November is tough, but 1st of October would be even tougher. Do you think some farmers have tried, and what sort of success do you think they've had? Have you witnessed any extra effort by farmers trying to hit sowing dates? And do you think they have achieved it, and could technology help? I mean, is the technology, is there other machinery or investment that farmers may have to consider making to be able to regrass more quickly?
There's a possibility, I suppose. I haven't heard of any such thing, but I imagine it's a possibility in the technology. Farming at this end of New Zealand is definitely weather reliant, so unless you've got favourable weather conditions, 1st of October would seem to be totally unrealistic, but not actually impossible on particular years, probably.
The leakiest ground is the river valley floor, and generally dries out more quickly. And I guess could you see that as an incentive, the way that they have done it, or a carrot to try and get farmers to get that ground worked and re-sown more quickly?
No, to me it seems actually completely the opposite. I would consider that the most dangerous ground to be winter grazing on or working up, because it's very much, and I'm only talking about the ground that I'm associated with, that is very, very prone to flooding. And I have seen instances of massive amounts of topsoil being taken off. So I think it's too risky to even do. I think Laurie has even better for his beef cows. He won't go onto his flats because of the damage. Is that right, Laurie?
That's right. So we run our cows up on the hill. We've got hill and flat, and the reason for that is it's all stony country up there, and just better for it. And we only bring them down onto the flats in the summertime, obviously to get grass quality going. If we wintered them down there, we'd just destroy the place, and that's why we've never done it in the last 120 years. And you know, when you work down there and put more pressure on that country, the worse it's going to be. The other thing about is that getting stuff sown early is great, but you've got to get your ground temperature up to 10 degrees or below the 45th parallel. And there's parts of West Otago and East and South that are only just starting to get there now. We have got big gear that we bought a few years ago. Last year we got everything sown in October. That's before the end of October. That's probably the only time we've done it. This year we're almost getting there, but we'll miss it. And, you know, no one is going to spend a whole lot of money on seed, which is bloody expensive, to put it in the ground to find out that it's not going to grow. I mean, why would you?
We're running over time, but final question, Jeremy.
Yeah, just in regards to Carol and Alan, but I was going to ask a question in farmers and who's got their grass and or who has, you know, in regards to these dates. I'm struggling, so I'm a fair bit ahead of us too, but none of you is indicate that it's pretty hard to get work with these days.
Just one quick comment, Mr. Chairman, if I may. It might be of interest as we go down the track. You suggest we have a working group that's doing some work. It might pay to keep in touch with this farmer group. If they're going to put a petition forward, as Eric has suggested, link it to community or testing some of the things that come out of our work may be beneficial to everybody going forward. So we may be better together, working together in some parallel than working separately.
We are restricted with the public forum, but watch the space. Thank you for coming in and presenting this morning, and I was very encouraged to hear that you guys are quite passionate about improving water quality, and that's the aim of the game. So thanks for your presentation, and I'm sure we'll keep in touch. So.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Right, we'll move to item 5, which is the confirmation of minutes for the ordinary meeting of council of the 30th of September. Somebody like to move? Moved by Lloyd, seconded by David. Any alterations? Not aware of any. I will put the motion. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Right, we'll move to item 6, which is the adoption of committee resolutions. First one up is Strategy and Policy Committee meeting.
I'm very happy to move. I don't think there's any need for any explanation other than what's recorded in the minutes. It wasn't a particularly long meeting, but happy to move.
Thank you, Eric. Moved by Eric, seconded for that. Seconded by Alan. All in favour will say aye. Move to the Organisational Performance and Audit Committee meeting of the 14th of October. Linda, would you like to comment on your meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Just to note that that particular OPAC meeting was the first in the separation of risk and financial meetings that we're looking at going forward with. And on that note, we adopted the risk management policy, and we had a really good discussion about procurement going forward. So with that, I will move that be adopted. Thank you.
Moved by Linda, seconded by Neville. No further discussion. I will put the motion. All in favour will say aye. Aye. And the third meeting was the Chief Executive's Review Subcommittee meeting of the 20th.
I'm happy to move that, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Lloyd, seconded by Jeremy. I'll put the motion. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Item 7 is notification of extraordinary urgent business supplementary reports or other. I'm not aware of any this morning. Item 8 is questions. I have not been made aware of any. So we'll move to item 9, which is the Chairman's and Councillors' reports. I have tabled a brief one, but I'm happy to ask any questions on any of the meetings I have attended. Peter.
All right, I've just reported stuff that I've attended, is that okay?
That's fine. Obviously, if there's no questions on mine, that's fine. You go ahead.
Thank you. Just the inaugural meeting of the Dipton Catchment Group, both myself and Alan attended that one on the 40th of October, and yesterday at the Headwaters, the Makaroiwa Headwaters Group in the Laura Gorge. Ended that meeting. Both very good, positive starts.
Thanks for that, Peter. And as I tabled, I've attended a couple of meetings last week, and I just encourage councillors when they get the chance to attend some of these things, because the people in attendance always appreciate us turning up, and we actually learn a lot. The Waimemu Downs one I found was a great initiative. See our staff working with them, but about 23 schools I think coming through that week and looking what they're doing, the mitigations they're putting in, kids catching little native fish in the creek. But it was, I thought, a really good community initiative, sitting on the edge of Gore, involving the children, but going to the trouble to actually try and put mitigations in place. And I think seeing some of those exemplars out there is really encouraging. I've got David, then Lloyd.
I attended the Between the Domes Cashman meeting last Thursday, and know there's certainly some initiatives taking place there to do with removal of plastic and other things. And no, I was quite heartened by just the enthusiasm of the number of people that turned up at Lumsden. So I know that there's certainly a lot of enthusiasm out there. And also, like yourself, I attended the chairs of the catchment meeting last week. So, no, there's a lot of things going on. I think the biggest challenge they've got is actually getting engaged with the full community. That seems to be the biggest issue for all the catchments. But no, there's certainly a lot going on. It's very heartening to see what's close.
Thanks, David. I've got Lloyd, Jeremy, then Robert.
Could I ask to ask a question?
Okay, I have a question up here.
So, David, you mentioned the difficulty with engaging with the full community. What do you mean by that? What part of the community are they finding is not engaging?
Just some of them, Robert, that are they're probably, I don't know whether you'd say head of the sand but
So it's not like the town? No, it's not a town.
no. A lot of the catchments actually have the township involved as well. So no, it's just really what you expect, really.
Yeah,
And,
okay.
I think until we end up with some idea of where things are heading and what people have got to do, it'll be at that stage they'll become fully involved.
Thank you.
Lloyd.
Thank you, Chairman. I attended the Mid-Arete catchment group at AB Lime, and I was really interested to see the use of a bunker on a area of about 40 hectares, which has actually avoided the flooding of the main offices at AB Lime. So a very simple 2 metre high structure sitting in the paddock, well designed, and it did its job extremely well. So I think sometimes we make these things too complicated, and when we go out and see something simple in the field, you go, yes, I can do one of those. It can make a difference. So I think sometimes those little things added together will make a big difference. So I was really pleased to go along and see good turnout and a lot of enthusiasm for that meeting. So,
Thanks, Lloyd. Jeremy.
Yeah, we're doing the catchment groups, but I attended the Gore catchment group and it was actually really, it was quite good because they had Bernadette Hunt from Federated Farmers there to explain the NES and the NPS freshwater. But it was actually, she was very informative, very knowledgeable and very clear, describing how it all works, but also she was very supportive of Feds were in regards to supportive of ES's position in dealing with this and working together. So it was really quite a positive briefing, and so I just wanted to make that point. So it's good.
Thanks, Jeremy. Any further reports this morning? If not, we will move to item 10, staff report, and item 1 is the Chief Executive's report. Rob, would you like to comment on your report?
Thank you, Chair, and just a couple of things. I guess it's a busy time. At the moment, we're doing a lot of work, as you know, with you, with the council on the LGP and developing that, workshopping, and this is a significant chunk of work in the organisations. It's one of the priorities for us, but also our work around improving water quality. You'll see that in the report as well, both in the policy, in the planning space, but also in science. And actually across the board around the work we're doing at the regional forums, also hitting our straps. So, lastly, just mentioned the recent flooding events, both at the weekend and then earlier on in October. So our science teams have been busy with that, and also working with EMS as they become sort of flood events and emergency situations. So. But happy to take any questions, Chair.
I've got Robert, then Alan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Rob. Under your biosecurity, biodiversity operations report, under marine, it talks about an area having been found on cray pots in Broad Bay here. And now I'm not quite sure about this, but has Undaria been found in that area before? And does this signal a big breakout problem, or is this just a minor issue? Because I see that the Undaria was found growing on the bedroom floor, presumably out away from the pots, and that it's established. Is this a big problem we're looking at here?
Well, it's a less than desirable news. We're working through what does that mean for us in terms of responding. Undaria is in that area, Stuart. It's not like Fielden where it's pristine, as it were. Trying to keep it out. Stuart Island's a different kettle of fish, but this is not good news.
This is the first one in your day.
I understand it, but what, I'm getting a report around actually the options as to how to deal with it, and is it, and is there something we can do to keep it out? And dairy, as you know, is a single cell organism, so once it's established, really difficult to control. So we're just looking at what is possible. Is it worthwhile investing some money to respond, or not?
And like,
We're also talking to, we've also had some conversation with industry about this, because this is, the industry needs to be playing a lead role in these areas, such as, especially in the marine space, where we rely on, pathways such as fishing boats to be.
and so what happened, do you think, in terms of the provisions that we've already got in place for stopping the movement of dairy?
So that's what I've asked my staff to come back to, is our pathway plan being breached in any way?
And you'll let us know.
I guess just on that, when we know it's endemic in the harbour, and that battle was lost some years ago, but when you've got a ferry going backwards and forwards, we've got a pathway thing for Fiordland, but that must make it quite difficult, but we'll wait to see. Eventually, I see Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So just on the policy and planning, and I see Lucy's in the room, so you may wish to defer to her, but in your notes there, it talks about, or your report talks about the 32AA analysis report, and a deadline for that report by the 30th of October 2020, so obviously in a couple of days. So how are we progressing with that report? If I look back at the 32A report, it was quite a significant document, about 238 pages, and is quite a critical part of the water and land plan. So how is that rewrite taking place? Is it going to be tracked changes, or is it a start again type rewrite, say?
As you suggest, I'll defer to Lucy.
You probably got writer's cramp.
I do, no. Thank you. Thanks for the question, Councillor, and through you, Chair. We're progressing really well. A 32AA is not as weighty a tome as an actual 32, thank goodness. But we've been directed by the court to undertake the task, which is unconventional because the changes have been made by the parties, and now we're having to assess those on behalf of the court. Everything's on track. We're in the final stages of editing, due to be submitted on Friday. So the lawyers and Matthew, but also two people in my team, have been working on it since the direction came in. So it's a big thing, but it's a thing we're being directed to do and having to do. So we're on track.
You're on track. Thank you.
Any further questions on Rob's report? Alan?
I asked about talked about the Trails Trust, Fiordland Trails Trust last meeting, and it indicated there would be a 40% discount. I understand that those within the Trails Trust were hopeful of a reconsideration of that, and we're looking for a meeting to talk about that. Has that got any further update on that?
No update on it. I'm not, that would be probably being planned at the moment. I haven't got that detail.
Any further questions?
I'm happy to move that, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Lloyd, seconded by David. All in favour will say aye. Item 2, which is the capacity building project. Ask staff to come forward and speak to the item.
Kia ora, through you, Mr. Chairman, kia ora, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to come in and talk to you today about the capacity building project. An apology from Jonathan Street, obviously, who's away unwell this week, and Sam Dixon, who I'm sure you're familiar with, Land Sustainability Officer, who's been a key person in getting us to this place in the capacity building project. What we'll do is we'll give a very short overview of the item. Obviously, we'll take it as read, but there's some key things that we wanted to highlight in terms of this project, and then we would welcome questions. So I guess to start actually, we are seeking that council both note the report that we have provided, but adopt the proposed liaison committee terms of reference. So that's in appendix 1 of this report, once the discussion is concluded. I guess in terms of background to this project, it has been underway for about 2 years now. We're working very closely, obviously, with the river liaison committees, and councillors have been aware of the discussions that have been going on, as I say, over those last 2 years. It's an important project in that it is developed to respond to the emerging issues that we're seeing. We've talked at length with the chairs, with the committees, about the importance of river management and flooding management, but we know now that with the current arrangements in terms of legislation, in terms of issues, a whole of catchment approach is going to be really important for us to be able to progress effectively some of the natural resource issues that we have. We also know that we've got a social setting that is changing from perhaps when the original 1979 terms of reference was adopted. So not only do we have those changing natural resource issues and legislation issues, we have a community that is far more aware. You all touched this morning on the catchment groups that have formed as a result of that interest and awareness in water and in ecological health. So I think it's timely that we looked at the liaison committee framework as well. The other thing that we've noticed in working with the committees, both ourselves and obviously Paddy's team in the catchment division, is that the actual committees themselves, in part, are wanting or looking at retaining the core work that they do, but they're also gaining interest in wanting to be involved in these wider catchment discussions. So, and certainly have shown interest in the catchment group model, have shown interest in a wider range of issues than perhaps they were initially intended to look out for. So over the last couple of years, we've met with the chairs and with a range of interested people on at least 3 occasions to discuss this project in the terms of reference and what's the important principles to the chairs, the important principles to council in terms of the work that the liaison committees do. Over the last couple of months, it was slightly delayed with COVID, as some things were. We also then met with Federated Farmers, so they were a key architect of the 1979 terms of reference, and we felt like it was really important that we connected with them on this discussion. We've connected with Te Marama. That's an area that the committee chairs themselves are very interested to learn and know more about, to interact more with iwi, with mana whenua. They understand with different levels of understanding the obligations that are faced by council and by the community in terms of working with mana whenua. So there's an opportunity there to develop that further. We also met with Meridian, so Sam will touch on the Waiau situation, which is somewhat unique because of the arrangements obviously around the flow of water. The only other thing I'll just draw your attention to is the range of topics. So we did meet with the combined chairs in March this year, and there's a long list of bullet points there, which we plan to work with the committee chairs on. But it just demonstrates that wider range of interests that the committees have. So, and I think that's going to be an important driver in terms of this project. Stand over Sam to go through some of the feedback that we received from the meetings and how we applied that.
Thanks, Fiona, and thank you, Council and Mr. Chairman. So the staff have met with the River Liaison Committees during July and August, which pushed back, as Fiona said, due to COVID. All of the committees do have strong views on the way that their committee should operate. As changes are happening to the terms of reference to expand that scope, it is important for the committee members to remember that their role as advisory committees and in isolation do not make decisions, as these decisions do rest on behalf of the council as the statutory authority. From the start, these committees have had the ability to challenge the council's budgets and work programs, but have never had that ability to halt the work. Therefore, to continue this relationship effectively, this needs to be addressed as soon as possible. The Waiau Liaison Committee does have a unique setting where the maximum consumptive take is by the power generator Meridian Energy. Following this theme, the River Liaison Committee has suggested that there be 2 subcommittees within the catchment, one solely a farmer committee and one inclusive of all. Following the discussions of the annual general meeting earlier this year, the Waiau Liaison Committee, Meridian Energy and the Council are about to enter into a facilitated discussion on the understanding and implementation of the 1996 agreement and what roles each entity plays following that agreement and the subsequent special rating district formation in 1998. Once this discussion is concluded, staff will seek to write up the findings and amend them to new terms of reference for clarity. In addition, the Waimatuku and Makuriwa decided that they did not want to be merged into the Waimatuku merging into Epirima and Makuriwa merging into Ariti, because they found that they do have separate river systems, that they do have different special rating districts and different goals at present. So at the moment we have left them as separate entities and we're not looking at merging them at present. There will be continued reinforcement of that connection between Makuriwa and the lower Ariti going forward, as the Makuriwa does flow into the Ariti and is in the same freshwater management. The feedback staff have received is invaluable for developing the terms of reference for the catchment liaison committees, and the report has been split into actual changes sought for the terms of reference and a commentary on the changes within each section. So I'll just run through the majority of these changes with objectives. Mostly all of these were agreed upon with the chairs and committees, but there was that point to add in the initial meaning of the 1979 agreement to put in the financial overview of the budgets. That needed to be stated a little bit more clearly for our chairs and committees. The catchment liaison committee's role was quite in a bit of contention. However, point 6 has been added from the draft to ensure that 6.4 from the original terms of reference about individual complaints has been included, and this as follows is to reflect the opinion of the whole catchment. Complaints or other matters pertaining to individual ratepayers may not be considered by the liaison committee but be redirected to the council, and that is to ensure that these committees are advising council on a whole catchment approach, not just individuals. The Mataura Liaison Committee had issues with the wording of soil health over soil conservation, and it has been explained to this committee how soil health encompasses soil conservation. The committee is not that happy with the scope being broadened and do want it limited to soil conservation. Without expanding the scope, the committee can only advise council on issues surrounding soil conservation. Therefore, for the future and present, it is advantageous to holistically look at soil and water and the connectivity of the entire catchment. The membership section did create a lot of discussion with the community conversations, and complementary additions from all committees have been included. And this was majority around it was the registered leases and leasees being able to be members, which as council and staff we do agree that leasees should be able to be members. Mataura would like it to be only registerable leases, but this is going a little bit too strong from the council's opinion to be able to allow more people to come into the conversation. The membership and correcting the committee structure across the board is quite difficult because we have subcommittees, technical advisory committees, and trying to pull them into just a committee was not something that any of the committees were enjoying the idea of. So the membership, we have inserted into here a subcommittee or technical advisory committee may be appointed at the AGM to deal with urgent issues and feedback on financial expenditure when required, and this legitimizes those groups. The larger membership and the subcommittee technical advisory group do have the power to co-opt and are generally open to any ratepayer. The YR Liaison Committee has also noted in this section that there should be a farmer subcommittee to deal with the 1996 agreement matters on behalf of the farmers or the signatories of the 1996 agreement. Staff recommend that council allow this however with an additional stipulation of an exit clause, so that once the mediation has occurred, there will be no need to continue a farmer-only subcommittee, as this will only create divide amongst the catchment community and the single water user. The appointment process, this has been added to formalise those subcommittees in addition, and the liaison committees, and it was created due to the large volume of information they need to process as well. In the original terms of reference, there was a stipulation of 10 members on the committee, but because we have such ranging committee sizes, we've taken that prescriptiveness out, and we will not be requiring committees now to go through the council to get approval of adding members if they require. On these subcommittees or technical advice committees, they can also co-opt special interest groups or people of employees of other organisations to come in to give technical advice and specialist advice. And for those projects that they're pulled into, they will be able to have voting rights if the committee decide. However, once that project is finished, that person will then exit the committee again. So the chairperson, the majority of committees had no feedback on the chairman's role. This highlights the respect that they do have for their chairperson and the respect that they do have for the voluntary position. But following that respect, we have kept in there the principles of participation, which is not highly excited or one of the most things that the committees wanted to carry on with. But to keep it as, to highlight that it is a full catchment thing going forward and to future-proof people coming in to these committees as we go through the years. We need to ensure that they do uphold that respect for their chairman and for their committee, so that all of their, if there is decisions made, that they do come as a holistic approach and not different from throughout the catchment. The quorum, as this was expected to be hard to sort of accommodate for all 8 committees, with, for example, Waituna, we had 3 at the AGM, and Tauta, we had 25 at the AGM, and Waia having about 50. So with this quorum, we've allowed for this, whatever they have requested, and these range for 3 to 6, and at each AGM, this quorum can change if they vote for it to change. And that is something that we will not put a Environment Southland must okay, because that is just for them and their voting rights and for them to be able to have some control. Collaborative decision making. This also was very contentious for 7 committees, excluding Waituna, as some committees would prefer majority rule over consensus. However, to ensure decisions made by committees reflect the wider committee and are credible decisions, is advantageous to have left this in the terms of reference. And now the collaborative decision making is by consensus, near consensus, or majority rule. However, the preference is on consensus, but understanding that we may not have that in everything. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Fiona for a few final comments.
So just one final comment, thank you, Sam. I guess through you, Mr. Chairman, in adopting a new terms of reference, I've just noted here, it's really important, I think, vital actually, to acknowledge the 1979 terms of reference. The people that have been involved in delivering that over many years, staff, past and present, our community members who have volunteered their time to be involved with implementing that or delivering that terms of reference with the liaison committees over a long time, back from the Southland Catchment Board to where we find ourselves today. So I do this with an enormous amount of respect for those people. The updated framework, we believe, will serve us well to tackle the outcomes of our community now through projects like People, Water and Land, you know, the challenges we have around climate change impacts, flooding risks and so forth, and we think it will encourage greater participation, which we think is really essential. And on that note, I'm happy to close and we welcome questions and discussion.
Right, I've got Robert, Ellen, Peter and Eric at the stage. Robert.
Yeah, good work. What an undertaking to trawl through just thinking about your consensus comments, you know, just even dealing with that issue. But Mike, I've got 2 questions for you, Fiona, really, and I'll say them at the same time. The first is around the physical makeup of the catchment groups, and I'm just wondering, because some of those catchments are divided upper and lower, Upper, for example. Do you think there'll ever be an imperative to, I mean, I'm thinking maybe in terms of government requirements, to bring those together in order to fulfil whatever might be asked? That's my first one. And the second one is around closer interaction with iwi, with mana whenua, as you described. how do you propose, or what are the proposals for that to happen, given that capability on some sides is very tricky and there's a large number of those groups?
So kia ora, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I think what's critical around the catchment groups is that they have developed around a group of people in a community rather than necessarily being informed entirely by kind of what we would call hydrological boundaries. And so I'm not sure, and I mean it's not up to me, I'm not sure that we'll see some coalescing of those catchment groups. But what I do think we'll see, and we do see in the upper Rima in terms of the ACE project, is those catchment groups coming together to work across an FEU. And I think there's a real opportunity to do that, and we encourage that where the groups choose to. And I think that's really positive in terms of us working alongside them, because river liaison committees, catchment groups, people, water and land, and then there are a range of other community groups and TAs and so forth. So yeah, so in answer to your first question, I would be surprised to see the actual joining of the groups. I do expect that we'll see them working really closely together across the FEU. And in terms of your second question around working with mana whenua, very, very conscious of capacity issues within iwi to work together. What I guess I would want to say in relation to that is I'm very conscious in terms of our treaty obligations that there are different levels in terms of how we work with Te Marama, with the Runaka. And so there needs to be a level, and it may well be through committees, it may well be through this councillor level where we work at the elected governance level with iwi. But there's huge opportunity, and I suspect more capacity than we realise, to work in what I would describe as an operational sense on the ground around looking at how do we enhance mahinga kai values, how do we improve access. And we've seen a little bit of that example in Waimuru Downs and the work that we've done up there with the local ruling representatives, and I think that's really valuable. And the other side of it too is just around funding, and I think that's a really important area for discussion. And I'm conscious of some of the challenges here, but how do we find opportunities to support, how do we find partnerships to be able to work? But I'm really conscious of that governance level responsibilities, and then I think of it as a kind of an operational working level responsibility. You've got to think about that. And it's real good work that can happen on the ground. It builds knowledge, builds connection, builds awareness, and some of our community who maybe have a lot to learn in that space.
Thank you. Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So I know it's been a long and lengthy process, and well done for nearly getting it there. So my first question really is on the local share on any of the rivers. So still, does there exist on any of the rivers a requirement for a local share? I know the Audit had one, but it's been changed a couple of years ago. But is any lingering issue there over landholders along the river's edge having to contribute a local share?
So actually that's not a question that is at my fingertips, but that's certainly the next part of this project. We'll conclude the capacity building project actually as such, but there's a conversation to have around the model for rating and funding that happens across a catchment, noting that a rating district is only a small part often of a whole catchment, and we have numerous rating districts across sort of, for example, the region. So that's something that we need to have a look at now as we go forward, and it needs to be part of the long-term plan discussion. It needs to be involving with the likes of the finance team, and also involving engagement with our wider community.
So you'll report back on that local share whether it exists, because it does seem to complicate, I think, going forward how we rate what this new entity is. As a catchment liaison committee, and there's a lingering issue where some of the rating comes from landowners on the catchment edge.
So you're absolutely correct. I'll just add to Fiona's, through you, Mr. Chairman. The part B of this project is to do that rating review. However, this, in terms of reference and sense checking the legitimacy and what work they do as liaison committees, is allowing that rates review to happen without any sort of holdback, and allowing that rates review to extend those rating districts to the entire catchment.
Thank you. And so really then, how do we determine success? So how do we know this is working? In light of, we've got some committees that have struggled to get numbers to come along, others haven't had a problem. And are they all still volunteers? particularly if there's going to be further requirement for more engagement, is there any expense reimbursement for anybody on those committees, particularly the chairs who might be required to come in and attend various meetings?
So I'll touch on through you, Mr. Chairman. So at this point, there's not been an enthusiasm, interestingly, from the committees to be in any sort of paid or reimbursement position. And part of that, I would suggest, is because they want to maintain their independence from the council and be of the community and representing the community view. I don't think that's a closed conversation. I think it's something that we may well see unfold depending on how things move ahead in terms of the development and potential expansion scope of some of these committees. So no at this stage, but not something that is off the agenda. But I'm conscious that there are reasons why the chairs are reluctant in that space. In terms of success, what does success look like? These committees are intended to be whole of catchment. They're intended to be working across a range of issues and advising the council on the things that we really want some help with in terms of the water, land and flooding issues we're working on. So, in my opinion, success looks like fully engaged committees that are somewhat representative of the community, coming in and sharing their knowledge with the council and also understanding some of the challenges that the council are facing as well. So that is how I would summarize that. Conscious of succession issues in those committees and wanting to reinvigorate that. Yeah.
Peter.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good work, you two, on this. It hasn't been that easy, but I attended a few meetings and I could pick up straight away the anxieties, you could say, from some of the committee members in a change around the refresh of the terms of reference, which is completely understandable. They're concerned about their future relevance. Will you manage, I've got a couple of questions. Did you manage to be able to convey to them that they'll be more relevant in the future when it comes, because basically, correct me if I'm wrong, we've been in a management phase really for the last couple of decades, you could say roughly, and we're probably going to move to more of a works phase, and they're going to be absolutely crucial, I believe, into enabling that. So that's one thing I'd like you to comment. The other one too is that their own individual capacity within their own groups to deliver. Have they got any ideas in how they're going to drive their membership to maintain their capability for the long term?
Right, okay.
Sorry.
That's right. Thank you. So through you, Mr. Chairman, I think the first question really is around, I'm going to describe it as the paradigm shift, and perhaps where our current sort of committees and chairs at in terms of the paradigm shift that we're currently, I believe we're currently in terms of how we think about land and water and catchments. And I think I have to be honest and say that there's a range of perspectives across all of the chairs and committees in terms of their willingness and understanding and readiness for change. I would suggest, that there is, and my comments about the legacy and the history are really important, and that's something that I've been both Sam and I, Paddy, councillors that have attended meetings, have been really honest about the importance of the work that's been done and the need to continue that, albeit, in a kind of a refreshed space. So I suppose I'm skirting a little bit around your topic and say, your question, I'd say there are a range of perspectives. I think there are probably more than half of the chairs understand and see the change ahead. Perhaps less understanding of exactly how to make that change, which is what I would expect. And I think we've all got some challenges around how we move forward into the future, and taking them with us, I feel, and having them as part of that discussion, in my opinion, is really important.
And that they're building that capacity within their own groups. Has there been discussion around that?
So, less discussion.
There's less discussion. It's very hard to get a chairperson who doesn't have the entirety of the members or the list at hand. People aren't that great with emails, especially when the majority of our members are above 65. So it's inherently hard. So there is some sort of more phone call treatments happening, with a little bit of help, some resources to help, especially with YR, helping Nessa quite a bit. It's about continuing that relationship with us and keeping it personable to deliver, to increase those people turning up to these meetings. However, for people to turn up to these meetings, the youth have other conversations outside of this project. They find it hard to come in as youth to join these committees and to stop having things read out from 1968. And then to also link back a little bit to your first question is, how do we make that change look good? So we've got, we're constantly telling these chairs and committees that by changing their scope and increasing their scope, we're actually increasing their scope of work. We're not limiting them, we're not inhibiting them from doing what they've been able to do. They can still do what they've always been able to do. However, the main issue is that we are now having to stamp that they are an advisory committee, and that has just progressively evolved since 1979. So that is the main sort of roadblock, is us re-stamping that they are an advisory committee and not have any powers or delegated powers.
Right, I've got Eric, followed by Jeremy, Lloyd and myself. Eric.
Some of my areas have been covered, but thank you anyway. Again, just appreciative of your work. A couple of quick questions. How long is it since we had such a comprehensive review of the liaison committees? Never?
Through you, Mr Chair, I'm not sure.
Of note, I could say 19.
No, well done. The other question is that you mentioned you had 3 workshops with the groups. How many of the liaison groups may or may not have been involved? Was there a general uptake? There was.
All liaison committees.
At
All
every meeting.
liaison committees
Well
were
done.
engaged.
That's all I
Yep,
wanted.
we're well
Thank you.
engaged.
Well done.
Jeremy.
Yeah, obviously I've been involved in this just about every meeting and many miles and many late nights. And firstly, I just want to acknowledge Sam, Fiona, and Paddy and his team. The work involved. This has been an interesting journey. And on the way, there's just writing a few things down. There's certainly been some good, robust discussion. Would be the best way to describe it, because there are some very passionate people and knowledgeable people have been involved in this for many decades, talking about, and certainly have their point of view on how things should be done. And we can't discredit that they have been involved with this a lot longer than probably a lot of us have been here. So, and I think it's quite an achievement to be able to get what we've got, and we've certainly facilitated in regards to. We've listened to people and inputted that information into it, and I think that will be appreciated by these groups. We want them to carry on and challenge their ability to get a bit more done, the scope of the job. So that's all I need to say. But it's been a long journey, but it's been a rewarding one at the end to put together.
Through you, Mr Chairman, thank you very much, Councillor McPhail, for turning up and actually being there on point all the time.
I've got Lloyd, myself, Alan and Lyndall.
Through you, Fiona, the advocacy role, we've had discussions in the past that the groups have actually advocated into consent or consent applications that may directly or indirectly come across their river management systems or what they deem to be their systems. I don't see that in the terms of reference here, maybe one, but everything else says basically they communicate and consult with council, they give their views to council. Is that your expectation that they will not be able to, or the intent is they don't do that sort of thing, that's not their role? So I just wanted to get clarification where you see them in that wider picture.
Yeah, so again, just really reinforcing that advisory, so they may want to give some advice to council if they hear or see a particular consent perspective or a planning perspective that they want to make comment on. But that's very different to being in an advocacy role, and I think that's a critical thing that we need to ensure we keep reinforcing with the liaison committees. The role for advocacy is outside of the liaison committee structure, so there are other structures set up, if you like, for that advocacy. Advisory is quite acceptable, so they may see, a consent application, they may want to provide some advice to us. If it's a particular catchment, for example, that's fine, but it's quite different to that group being formally advised and formally involved in an RMA process, for example, from an advocacy point of view. Yeah, and I mean, there's a real challenge for some of the catchment groups, if I could just comment around that desire to be advocating and advocacy on policy versus implementing action on ground. And I think they're all.
Environment Court basically did the same thing, so I just wanted to clarify that, thank you.
Yes, thanks for the work. It has been a journey. I think you two might be able to be seconded to herding cats after the experience you've gained over the last couple of years, but this is quite a sea change. I mean, we've had catchment groups whose main focus has been mainstay in keeping a river channel free of weeds, etc., to trying to go to a whole catchment focus, which includes runoff from people who've never had much to do with the rivers before. So it's a big shift, and it will hopefully give us a lot more people to actually have the conversations with, and just I guess along the way with some of the, and thanks for keeping flexibility in the terms of reference. They did start off with a one-size-fits-all sort of a concept, and I'm glad you picked that up because these groups are all a bit different. The ability for other groups, like in Tiania the other day, we've had NZTA putting their hand up that they might come to the next meeting. I know the lady, Iwi Anglum, actually attended at least one meeting in my time representing Iwi. Worth encouraging Doc and other people, and also the townships to be involved. I guess one of the issues we've had has been sporadic attendances. I'm just wondering whether we could cautiously put out something to chairs before the annual meeting on just tips on how to have a successful meeting, and those that bring round or contact have a better turning up than others. It's just something that might be helpful going forward. So thanks for that. Now I've got Alan, then Lyndall.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So this is more of a question to the wider council post what's sort of happening here. So it's like an end of an era. We've had something that's been active in the community for 40 odd years, but it's probably even longer than that because we're talking from, I'm sure before 1979 there was activities going on in the rivers to keep them largely in their channels. So is it appropriate, or could it be seen as appropriate to capture some of those characters that have been on those committees over the last 40 plus years, and it's almost like a legacy sort of type book on what's gone on. I sense that, and again, it's the age of those chairs. They have been involved for quite a long period of time. Some will continue in the new space, I feel. Some might find it's an opportunity to say goodbye and reflect on someone else's turn now to be involved in the newer, wider process. So is it, or would it be appropriate to consider having a book or some form of a capturing of what's gone on? And I know Emma Moran is one person that comes to mind that seems to looking back, reflecting on things that have gone on in our region, because there's a lot of characters there, and it's almost a way of recognising their volunteer contribution over this long period of time that we recorded for prosperity and captured some of the imagery of our floods and our meetings and our tensions. It's a thought.
Lyndall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to join the chorus of approval and say thanks to the team, but also perhaps obliquely pass on my thanks to the River Liaison Committees and their chairs, because it's been it's been a difficult time for many of them, and I'm really impressed that everybody's managed to kind of come onto the same pages. And actually, I'd reinforce Alan's, Councillor Beard's point about maybe celebrating some of those individuals that have come through. And it may not be a book, it might be a Facebook post. I mean, I don't know, but I think there's a way that we could perhaps acknowledge some of that too. But I've just wanted to pass on my thanks to them and you.
David.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to say well done. I've been to the odd meeting and every group has a different concept and kind of control they have. And the question is, the catchment groups within those areas, how much feedback do you have from them as to whether they're going to be engaged with these liaison on the new setup, if you like? Do you have much feedback from them at all?
So we see that happening already, actually, in limited way. So we've got in the Matoda, there's obviously a connection between the Matoda Liaison Committee and the catchment groups, a financial connection and a strong interest in the people involved in the Liaison Committee to connect more. We've seen interest in the Makariri to work more closely with the catchment groups that are in that area. And so we see that, and I think we'll encourage that. Certainly at the start of the conversation, there was some discussion around coming together. Actually, that's not appropriate, it's not right, and we wouldn't ever, we stopped that really, but we will look at what opportunities we can have to actually bring the groups together, as time goes by. Yeah.
I'd just like how much awareness there was amongst the catchment groups themselves.
So again, it's a mix. So in Upper Ema, there's a close connection between the ACE project and Grant McGregor, who's the chair of the Upper Ema Liaison Committee. That's obviously very well across the region. Yeah.
Or do you wanting to move? Or
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, after the comments have been made, it's appropriate to move with some enthusiasm into the new era going forward, and I'll be happy to move the resolutions, both 1 and 2, as stated in the papers.
Moved by Wood, seconded by Jeremy. We'll put the motion, all in favour will say aye. Aye. And now I see we do have the Thriving Southland people at the back of the room, and they were scheduled for 11:30, so I'm proposing we take them now. So would you like to come forward? Welcome.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
So thank you for the invitation to present today. I'll leave it up to Richard really to talk about the work streams we've got underway and some of the work that's been done. And then we'll be open for some questions.
Yep, so
Councillors will have some. Okay, thank you very much.
Chair Nicol. Thanks very much for the invitation to come along and update the council on Thriving Southland's progress to date. As we signed up with MPI during March. COVID probably slowed our progress down, but I suppose we've got through quite a lot in the last 4.5 months, working with catchment groups and supporting catchment groups. And working alongside your own catchment coordinators and land sustainability team. So we've, I suppose the Thriving's, we started with a baseline study of where catchment groups were, what they were looking for, and what they wanted in the way of support. What they did want was they wanted support around engagement with their groups to grow the groups, support to run their groups, and that's around the ability to manage, I suppose, their databases, their own databases, and comms, and again to support around projects, which is where we've been, where our focus is on helping them to work through looking at projects that take into account the direction of travel in the environmental space, but also at the same time maintaining profitability. So we've completed a baseline study. One of the things that came back as well from the groups was they don't want duplication. And that's something we've found. There's a lot of people in the same space, so Thriving is there to actually add to what's being done, not to duplicate what's being done. And a lot of the stakeholder groups, beef and lamb, dairy and Z, dairy industry, they're all working in the environmental space. It's important that we don't duplicate and double up, but it's about working together. So that's been a process of getting to understand what's happening and actually seeing where we can add to that. We've also just completed an environmental science literature review. So that was the really strong request from the groups for the science. They want to know what is the science around their own catchment and what's relevant to them. So we worked, so that work was done through Lampro, who pulled that, the science review of what's available there, out there now. And we do understand there's more in the way of science to come out, but we've produced the report, which we'll launch we'll put out there on the 15th of November to the catchment groups. And it's really taking the science, what's available, and putting it in a plain English, what does this mean to you and what does this mean to your catchment? And it's also, we're very clear it's about a moment in time. So as more science rolls out, we will take that and put that alongside it. The next piece of work we're looking at is actually, as the individual catchment groups, they want to know, the review sits as a whole, they actually want to know what is actually relevant to us. So we're going to pull that apart for them, but there's also work, we understand there's work happening with Environment Southland in that space. I mean, our job's around interpretation, so it's easy to pick up and easy to read and easy to understand. So that's a piece of work we just completed. And we've also just completed a stock take on tools and resources available through all the different stakeholders, Environment Southland included, beef and lamb, dairy and Z, ag research, all the resources around environment, the tools that, we went to them and said, what are your top 4 or 5 tools, tools and resources, and we've collated them in one place on the Thriving Southland website, which is another piece of work that's just been completed. So that's where I suppose the work behind the scenes has been happening, and then also we've been working on farmer engagement with catchment groups around projects. I suppose the comment would be made, farmers are in a position of that just awareness of needing to move and needing to change is only just happening for a lot of farmers. And in that space, I suppose we were hoping for projects that were a bit more looking into the future a bit further. We've got some groups that are starting to move in that space, and the ACE project is one of them. The other catchment groups are really just starting to, they're looking for information, they're wanting information, and they're wanting to know where things are moving. So we're also working on putting project ideas out to the groups, and some of that will be around farm systems modelling as we move into as the NPS comes into effect, and the changes start to impact when we're looking at reducing footprint. Looking at farm systems modelling, this isn't the time for farmers to be making radical change until they know where they need to go. But we can actually model that and start looking at that to build confidence that this, as change comes through. So we're going to be putting some work out in front of groups that they can actually have a look at. It's really important that the groups, and I suppose the major feedback from groups when we talk to them is they maintain their independence. They're independent groups, we don't, we work for them. So it's for them to pick up the projects and them to own them, because if they don't own the group, if they don't own the project, we're going to be left with a lot of projects half finished. So it is a case of bringing the groups along
putting the information in, and also across using the groups to actually talk to each other, because there are farmers and groups that are further ahead in their thinking, and when you join that together, it certainly makes a difference. So that's probably an update of where we're sitting today. Thanks.
Thank you for that, and I've got a few questions already. I've got Lloyd, Peter, then Robert. Lloyd.
Mr. Chairman, been great work in a short time, really. You've covered a lot of stuff. I was just wondering, are you looking through the lens, I'm looking forward now, are you seeing farmer projects develop, or are you starting to see community projects develop up in front of you?
Certainly rural community projects, yeah, and that's quite strong. So it is linking. There's farmers and community. There's quite a link there. At the moment, we're just probably seeing a lot of engagement projects.
I suppose the question would be, Lloyd, define that. So,
well, I'm looking at what I'm suggesting is farmers can do stuff on farm, or a couple of farmers might get together on a valley. But through that process, they're actually starting to say, I'm doing a little bit, but it makes you better off to go down to that farm down there and think of a bigger, more involved project, because I can hit 50 farms and not just 2. So, and sometimes we don't see them until we start the work on the smaller scale, and we start to see that we may be able to scale up. And I'm probably thinking, we had a conversation earlier on that basically said, can we hold the water somewhere and take the initial flush out of the water systems? We see that with the dam at Winton, I saw it at AB Line, and take the top off so you actually have a longer water flow than a big water flow. And we see some of those things as we start to do this work. And I was just wondering whether you'd start to see that sort of stuff.
We are, and as you work with the groups and their community, they actually, so some of the projects we're doing are around the farm systems profitably linked to the environmental change, but the groups are becoming more and more aware that the environmental change is a catchment-based change, that it's not on the individual, it's actually on the whole catchment making a difference. And some of those differences, they'll be all different for different catchments, but yeah, the awareness is certainly there. And also we start getting the awareness of working together, and the Matara is certainly an example of where they're really starting to talk to each other. They realise that the linkages are there.
and through the process, Lloyd, we're able to encourage that train of thought as well. So, it's a wider broadening of the understanding of the issues and how we manage them.
Yeah, I think if I talk to you through Sharon, we've actually as a council be interested in some of those conversations, because they'll be bigger than you, but they may be something we can handle as a regional input.
Peter.
Thanks, through you, Chair. Thanks very much, you and Richard. You know I'm a big fan of Thriving South. I think it's a secret, and just picking up from what Lloyd was talking about. Do you see Thriving South? And I know the capability. I'm quite impressed with the capability amongst your group. Do you see yourselves as thought leaders in the province, or developing into that role? And you mentioned things probably aren't pushing far enough out as you would like. Do you see your role as pushing that out, around the possibilities around farm systems, for example? The way I see Thriving South and developing is being more like a rural type of equivalent of Great South, for example, of covering that off.
So, well, 2 points. First of all, I'd just like to acknowledge that we've got Kate. It's got online purpose that Kate's. Kate might chip in from time to time. So coming back to your point, Peter, I don't see us usually as being thought leaders, as being encouraging that process to happen in our community. So it's actually bringing your farmers along on the journey and creating a greater understanding of the complexity of the challenge, because it isn't just nutrient carbon's part of it as well. And through that process, then encouraging our farmer leaders to think about what that looks like. Richard would like to hear that.
Yeah, I suppose in that space, we are focused on putting public speakers and people in front, putting ideas in front of farmers for them to pick up. So, and we had Melissa Clark-Reynolds speaking just this week on that same, and that's about linking with the consumer, where the value is now, where it wasn't before, and that's to actually for farmers to pick that up and start thinking through that, and catchment groups to think about that as
Facilitating that forward thinking as opposed to doing it yourself.
Yeah, and I think farmers are, you'll find that they've got a business, they're running a business. A lot of them they've got debt, they've got other things on their minds. So actually to actually make that information available and put it in front of them is and that's when they start. They've got plenty of time to think. They know how to farm. So
Sitting on the tree.
yeah. So it's when you and that's part of what we're there to do, is to facilitate that change.
Good work. Thank you.
Robert.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Couple of things. Seems to me that the funding that you've been given by the government, or been made available to you, is going to farmers, essentially. Was that your...
The funding's under the Sustainable Land Use Fund, and that's where the funding came from. But we have, talking with MPI and the feedback from the catchment groups, is we want community to be part of that fund, but there's limits to where that fund can be spent. We're looking in, but we've also made it clear that we'll help catchment groups look for other funding if we can help promote that. If there's a look at other areas of funding, if it sits in a different area, but it fits the purposes of the group.
So I take it that town catchments, creeks and rivers and so on through towns or cities need not apply.
We've engaged with the Waihopai's engaged, and if they're linked through to a rural catchment group, we certainly can look in that area. But it's not for, I suppose, not for urban water projects as such. But there's a real understanding of that linkage through, and the link with the New River Rescue Forum, and as I say, the Waihopai will be another area. We're working on a project of bringing the Aquavan down, which will, but it's supported. It'll be supported by the Matara catchment groups.
So we're obviously, as Richard's identified, it's our funding stream is out of that sustainable land use package. So it is rural focused, but we've had that conversation with the MPI around about the fact that actually these are about communities, the catchment groups are about communities. So there has to be that engagement across that community. So yeah.
I think perhaps, if I can just chip into that, it's Kate here, a little bit further to that is, as an organisation, Thriving Southland very much has its commitment to the communities of Southland, and as a board, one of the things that we are looking for is for opportunities to find additional funding to that has arrived from MPI, so that we can continue to find those other opportunities to link with the community.
Thank you. Could I just follow up? My actual question was going to be, in terms of how you operate, are you just responding to requests from farm groups, catchment groups or whatever, and then providing whatever they want, or are you initiating some projects yourself? Why I ask is, firstly, I'm wondering about climate change and the importance that has in terms of the whole of the rural sector. Are you actively investing in research or collation of research that's already there, so that you can present to those farmers the big picture which they can't do themselves? And or are any of those groups asking for that? And is this happening right now? Because it seems that if it isn't, you're behind the eight ball a wee bit.
So we are talking with other stakeholders who are certainly in the climate change, greenhouse gas space. We're talking, there's work, DUNZ and Ag Research are doing some work with communities of practice. We're talking with them about how we can extend that work. The science review, and we do have catchment groups asking for work in that space. So we're the groups themselves, across them all, there's a range of understanding. But in the greenhouse gas space, and in the science review that's on water quality, doesn't cover greenhouse gases. We're certainly aware of that is there now. As I say, we're looking at projects that can go across Southland around understanding greenhouse gases that can actually be put in front of catchment groups around that understanding. So yes, we are working in that space.
We've got David, followed by Alan and myself. David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I just really want to say well done, because I've been around to a number of catchment group meetings, and just talking to those, the fact that you're coordinating and facilitating, and I don't know who would have taken that space. Honestly, I think that what you're doing is marvellous, and also the enthusiasm that comes out of those meetings with those that are attending the staff is certainly appreciated. So I think the statement of role was absolutely necessary. Just talking to the catchment groups, they certainly appreciate it. So just well done. Yeah.
So thank you, David, because we are getting some extremely positive feedback. So
it's been great.
Alan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I hope, I'm most likely think you are aware of them, but I guess 10 days ago, the council put on, or some of the councillors put on their wind jackets and visited the Rakatu wetlands, and certainly got an overview of what's possible. And I've seen Lloyd talking about larger type wetlands rather than just a small pond or a sediment trap on your property, but being able to visualise what's possible, and whether Mark Sutton or others from the Wild Trust can communicate, talk, or at least share their knowledge, and as an opportunity for a field trip for some of those key ones in those catchment communities to see what's possible or see what's being done. That they've got some good infrastructure in place.
Thanks. And it's really important that we do that, and we're about not trying to find duplication. Sometimes you've got to let groups innovate, so they might innovate around sediment traps in different ways, but actually the next layer of thinking is the information is there, and we can link groups to others, and actually through your own team here at Environment South, and they've certainly got a lot of expertise in that area, so it's actually trying to linking all that together.
Yes, no, it's great to have you along here today, and really good to see that you're actually collating information, you're sharing information, because there's a lot of information out there and people don't even know it's there. So that's the science stuff will be great, and actually putting it into layman's language will be really useful. And it's great to seeing a lot of volunteers getting a wee bit of resource to support them, because we know this is hard yards, and it's really good to have that sort of whole of community involvement going forward. We've already helped you. You might notice we've given you our vision of the wall there, but that's all good. We're all on the same page. So just well done, and I look forward to that partnership arrangement where we continue to work together and share information for the same goals. Any further questions or comments? If not, thanks for coming in today.
Before we go, just thank your team. Nicole has certainly been working alongside and helping us with to get up and get going, and so really appreciate it. And from all the teams, the science team and the Lances team, we really appreciate the help and working together. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
So, moved by Lloyd, we received the report, and second by Alan. All in favour, say aye. Aye. Right, we will now backtrack slightly to item 3, which is the meeting calendar.
This item, council are required to adopt a meeting calendar, and at this stage it's quite clear. Purely the council meetings in it, but once they're nailed down, then we can fit the River liaison meetings will need to be scheduled in for the February-March period. This is a starter for 10, and I understand Councillor Roy has an issue with one of the dates already, so you might need to come to the
I'm very flexible, but one day will not work.
That is the 17th of February.
Yes, that one. So we'll go either a week before or a week after, but I'll firm up with you on that, so.
Any additions or alterations to the meeting schedule? I just see the LTV workshop for the 19th. It appears I'm the only one going. I'm assuming everybody else is going to that one. In fact, that's one I'll probably have to leave early on.
Oh, we're not on to the diary.
Oh, we're not, okay. So I've jumped ahead, sorry. Yeah, we have to. Yeah, way ahead. Okay, now we're on the calendar, yeah.
I'll move that. We're at that point.
Lyndall's moved, seconded by Neville. All in favour, say aye. Aye. Okay, now we're going to move on. Yeah. So any additions or changes to the meeting schedule or any?
I had some additions to make. First of all, Councillor McCullum's leave of absence request, he's advised me, but you need to formalise it today at the meeting in November. There's an information query native plant nursery at the Waihopo Marae on the 5th of November to be included, and the chairman's attending that one. On the 21st of November, there's the Ariti Totara Dune forest opening, and the chairman is attending that meeting. I have the Osprey Stakeholder Council meeting listed on the wrong day. It's actually on Friday, the 20th of November. And we had added in this morning to Waiparera Trust meeting and an annual general meeting on the 23rd of November for the chairman and councillor McCullum. The changes that are on there.
The South Island Chairs meeting, it's a Zoom meeting, so I'm not sure if you need to have that recorded or not.
So that's the NZTA.
Yeah, the Regional Land Transport, Regional Tractor Transport Committee.
It was there, I think. Well, that's a dream one.
Program for that.
Any further additions or requests for leave? If not, would somebody like to move the item? Moved by David, seconded by Jeremy. All in favour, say aye. Aye. Right, we'll move to item 5, which is the common seal. I'll move it by Lloyd, seconded by Lyndall. All in favour, say aye. Aye. Driving south and looking out water. Item 6, Three Waters Reform Program Update. Comment on it at all, Rob, or just?
This is just really an update of where things are at in terms of the Three Waters. As we've talked about, a lot going on in the space. It does impact on the TAs much more than ourselves. We are involved in the Otago Southland group, but the main reason for that is to keep connected and also to recognise that we've got some close links with MFE in terms of water quality, so just making those linkages and recognising these are regional matters. So, but this is really impacts on the TAs. This is going to, and this is part of the government's wider program of work around improving water quality, and noting that significant investment in infrastructure is required.
Any questions on the item? We did try and traverse it a little bit earlier in the day, so if there's any questions, I'll ask somebody to.
Question, just for clarity, the role of regional councils, paragraph there, environment observers in the collaborative network. So what can we do to influence the progress of this change? That is my question. I think the regional council should be more than observers. We need to be participants.
So at the moment, we've got a conversation going on at Otago Southland basis, mainly by Zoom. So we are part of that conversation. As far as the funding that's come from government, that is TA specific, and they've received a certain amount of money, and it's sort of on a population type thing broadly. We're not receiving funding, but we sort of are expected to be in part of that conversation. But Rob might like to add.
Well, also, so this is around, looking at how should the infrastructure be managed, owned and managed going forward. So obviously it's owned by the TAs at the moment and managed. So this is around the concept of a bigger CCO type arrangement, looking after wastewater and drinking water. Stormwater still hasn't been quite nailed down yet. Our role's still there as a regulator. We'll need to work in with the national water regulator a wee bit more, but still we've got a fundamental responsibility around the RMA requirements of the infrastructure. So that doesn't change. It's just who are we dealing with, who is the owner. So we've got to respect the TAs. In my view, my advice is we've got to respect the TAs as being the owner, and this has implications for them. This is their decision. We need to be there to maybe a bit more than an observer, just to be able to provide advice around the expectations and requirements around water quality. And so the TAs will be thinking around how do they, if they hang on to this asset, then it's going to be a choice. They won't get the same level of assistance, and they'll still need to improve infrastructure so they can meet the improved water quality responsibilities. We can't give them a cast iron guarantee out of any of this because we've got a role that needs to be played out. Does that make sense? So it's a.
I suppose I was working towards what would be the role of regional council if the new entity fails to deliver in water quality in an area. We're the regulatory group at the moment, so where do we stand?
So we'll
regulate itself, or
no. So we're still the regulator. It doesn't change. So we've still got a job to do. So that's why we need to be aware of that in terms of helping the conversation, but not saying here's what you must do. So we still have so if there's a spill of sewage, then we'll still have jobs to follow that.
Robert.
Wondering about that. Any private entity looking to take on that role would have to bear in mind the new water quality expectations that are coming through, which could be considerably higher than being faced by the councils at the moment. Have they thought this through?
So this is a CCO, so it would be council controlled organisation that would be managed potentially by all of the TAs in an area. And so it wouldn't be a private company, it wouldn't be a Downers or whatever. Right. So they're not talking about privatising at this stage anyway. I don't think this government will do that. But so it'd be a CCO. Yeah.
Yes, they've been quite clear that they're not talking privatisation, they're talking amalgamation and council controlled organisations.
Yeah, so they're talking council controlled organisations. And they're not talking about any broader agenda either around what does that mean for the future local government. That may well if there's any questions.
Lloyd.
Yeah, I'm just following up what Neville said and a little bit what Robert said, Mr. Chairman. I just wonder whether we should be sort of have an overview of a back-to-back, front-to-back view on this. A lot of the conversation's been front-loading to what new structured could do going forward. I wonder whether we should be saying, like, hey, if there is a new structure, CCO, whatever it looks like, don't know, how does it actually play out from front to back? So we actually have monitoring and compliance out the back end that's actually able to be put back to the government and saying this CCO is actually performing as you intended or not intended. I think we need a little bit more development of that idea.
So that's a fundamental part of it. So at the moment we've got a highly devolved water system in the country. I'm increasingly getting national direction, but actually, and the fresh water was a really good example where we had the issue in Havelock, where things turned to custard, if you like. But actually, and a lot of failures occurred between health and the broader way of water is managed. So these reforms are a response to that. How do they provide more national direction and certainty? So there'll be reporting involved in these changes, both in terms of how the infrastructure is working, and they'll be expecting us to also manage how the environmental performance is working and reporting back. And we'll be working with the new water regulator as part of all of that. So the water regulator will have an overview that will be required to be reported to that water regulator. Some of that details still to be shaped up, but yeah. So the clear expectation is there's got to be improvements in infrastructure and got to be improvements in environmental performance.
Understanding that, the impression I have is at the moment they'll do water take and sewers, but not stormwater. So I think to me we need a little bit more rounded conversation around this. And while we're watching it go through, I just think,
what does it
look like? Because I think we need to be forward thinking in this. And
so what does that look like though, what you're talking about?
Well, the stormwater is the most expensive and the most difficult one of any. But my understanding, talking to Claire, is that wasn't on the table to be taken as we go into this new CCO. So I think we need to make sure that this, whatever the structure is robust, will do the job, and we've got to put a New Zealand 5 million sort of hat on and say, is this the best outcome for New Zealand? Bearing in mind all the standards we have to meet. So, because this is, I think in the back of my mind is we've got 35-year consents that are running out, and the standards going forward are going to be substantially different to the standards they had, even though the infrastructure is working correctly to what it was designed. But going forward, we're going to put another test layer or two over the top and say we want these outcomes, not those outcomes.
I think going forward, if you have an entity that takes over the other two, the other one will probably have to naturally follow. But there's a number of conversations going on. One has been the under developmental performance of these entities, and the other one, and it's sort of, I guess, being recognised with the money that's dribbling in from central government, that actually one of the reasons that the infrastructure upgrades haven't happened is because in recent years you haven't had the ability to apply some national funding, the old Swiss funding for free wastewater and sewage schemes. Went defunct probably 15 or 20 years ago, and I know there's a paper in Wellington that's never been released that did suggest that there was a new scheme. The other part of it, I think, has been that the water quality thing is sat on the health department's door, and they've never really ran with it. So now you've got a regulator. This is a bit of a moving feast, and obviously we're going to be part of the conversation, that it is by no means settled as to what's going forward, but we can expect it to move at pace, I think. Neville.
That's behind the question that I was asking, we need to be asking these questions of whoever's arranging the new structure. Rather than being a passive bystander, I think we need to take some initiative and say, well, we have a number of questions about how this will actually operate. What's it going to look like? Where is our role specifically? Do they report to us, or do we report to them? Do they take over all the existing consents as they are, or and try to reset them? There's a whole lot of questions that we could ask as an organisation so that we actually have a hand in the changes.
So Chair, certainly and I guess a couple of things. We're still at a really early stage. We're still at the phase 1 stage where they're doing the investigations. And so there's plenty of scope for us to be looking at, or encouraging the role of stormwater to be included. I'm clear in my mind about our role around as a regulator, but if it helps to actually get that crystal clear, we can, absolutely can. I think the regional councils collectively will be having some discussions with DIA on this as well. But yeah, we can link them in, and I think it might be useful to get the water regulator and DIA down here to talk to us at some stage. Maybe to the Mayoral Forum and to this council, just to talk about roles and responsibilities. But this ain't, so we've still got RMA responsibilities. That's not going to shift. So that's the first thing I guess we need to be clear on. But by all means, let's use the opportunity being at the first stage just to be advocating for a more holistic approach to the three waters, and engage around and just confirm roles and responsibilities.
Peter?
Yeah, just quickly, I just want to back up Councillor Cook's view on that, because whatever pressures applied to ratepayers throughout Southland does affect us here. Need to be mindful. So support that view.
And look, the other thing is this isn't going to be a money-saving exercise. So significant government money coming in, but there will be some, I'd imagine, some costs to ratepayers.
Yes.
Recommendation.
Moved by Neville, seconded by Peter. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Right, that concludes the public portion of the meeting.
I don't know if this is about this, but Christmas dinner, could we make a decision about that, and when would we talk about such a thing?
Next.
Pardon? We'll make sure you'll be offline.
No, not yet.
You're beaming out live